The low, insistent buzz of my phone against my hip was the first anomaly. I was standing in the tastefully landscaped garden of my parents' suburban home, a glass of lukewarm champagne in my hand, tried to appear engaged in a conversation with my Uncle George about the lamentable state of modern topsoil. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, a command performance for the entire extended family, and my 17-year-old daughter, Lily, who was supposed to be right beside me, had vanished about 10 minutes prior. My name is Dr. Alastair Hayes, 51 years old, and for the better part of 3 decades, I have been a senior research scientist in the field of microbiology, a profession that has trained me to pay excruciatingly close attention to subtle signals, to deviations from the norm, to the almost invisible harbingers of a potential systemic contamination. The text message on my phone screen, when I finally discreetly glanced at it, was from Lily. It was brief, cryptic, and, given her usually articulate nature, deeply alarming. It simply read, "Dad, we need to leave. Now, don't ask questions. Just meet me at the car. Please." My heart, which had been beating with the slow, steady rhythm of a man enduring a tedious family gathering, gave a sudden, sharp lurch. This was not teenage drama. This was not a sudden desire to escape Uncle George's pedantic horticultural musings. Lily was not a dramatic child. She was like me, quiet, observant, analytical. For her to send such a message, with such uncharacteristic urgency, meant that she had observed something, some variable in this carefully controlled social experiment, that had triggered a profound and immediate threat assessment. I offered a polite, if somewhat abrupt, excuse to Uncle George, my mind already racing, sifting through the data points of the afternoon. The strained cheerfulness of my mother, Beatrice. The almost performative bonhomie of my father, Arthur. The presence of my younger brother, Julian, and his impossibly glamorous, and, I had always felt, rather predatory, wife Cassandra. The hushed, almost conspiratorial, conversations I had occasionally glimpsed between my mother, my brother, and his wife, conversations that would cease abruptly whenever I or Lily approached. I made my way through the chattering throngs of relatives, my own internal anomaly detection system now on high alert. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally out of alignment in the seemingly placid ecosystem of this family party. I found Lily waiting by my car, parked at the far end of the long, winding driveway, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a grim resolve that looked unervingly adult on her young features. "Lily, what is it?" I asked, my voice low, urgent. "What's happened?" "Just get in the car, Dad," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, I'll explain when we're away from here." I didn't argue. I trusted her instincts, her quiet, observant nature, implicitly. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the brightly lit house, at the tableau of feigned familial bliss playing out on the perfectly manicured lawn. It looked like a picture from a glossy magazine, a perfect representation of upper-middle-class contentment. But I knew, with the chilling certainty of a scientist who has just identified a virulent and previously undetected pathogen in a seemingly healthy culture, that something within that picture was deeply, profoundly unwell. "Okay, Lily," I said, once we were safely on the main road, the cheerful sounds of the party receding behind us. "Talk to me. What did you see?" She took a deep, shaky breath, then turned to me, her eyes filled with a pain that made my heart ache. "Dad," she began, her voice barely a whisper, I went back inside to find the bathroom, and I overheard Grandma and Grandpa talking to Uncle Julian and Aunt Cassandra. In the study, the door was ajar. She paused, swallowing hard. "They were talking about you, Dad. About your money. About the new research grant you just won. And about the family trust. Grandma was saying that since you're divorced from Mom, you're no longer a direct beneficiary in the same way, and that it was time to take steps to ensure the core family assets were protected." My blood ran cold. The family trust. My grandfather's legacy. A substantial portfolio intended to provide for the long-term security of his descendants, including me, my brother, and our children. And then, Lily continued, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Uncle Julian," he said not to worry. He said he had a plan, a way to mitigate the risk of you being an unpredictable variable. He mentioned a new lawyer they'd hired, a man named Thorne, who specialized in an asset reallocation and contesting problematic inheritances. Thorne, the name, though unfamiliar, landed with a chilling weight. And Aunt Cassandra, she laughed, Dad. She said it was about time someone managed your finances properly before you wasted it all on your dusty old microbes. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The casual cruelty, the cold, calculated avarice of it all was breathtaking. They were not just my family. They were a hostile entity, plotting, conspiring to dispossess me, to sideline me, to effectively erase me from my own financial and familial legacy. And they were doing it under the guise of a celebratory anniversary party, a grotesque parody of love and connection. "But that's not the worst part, Dad," Lily whispered, her eyes now filled with tears. "The worst part was what Grandpa said. He said the best way to neutralize the threat was to prove that you were unstable, mentally unfit to manage your own affairs. And he said they already had a doctor, a friend of theirs, who was willing to be helpful in that regard." The car swerved slightly as a wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me, an emotion I rarely allowed myself to feel. This was not just about money. This was a declaration of war. A war on my character, my sanity, my very identity. My own father, my own mother, my own brother, conspiring to have me declared mentally incompetent in order to seize control of my assets. It was a plot so monstrous, so diabolically cold-blooded, that it bordered on the surreal. But Lily had heard it. She was my witness, my irrefutable and most precious data point. What my esteemed family didn't know, what they, in their arrogant underestimation of the dusty microbiologist, had failed to factor into their predatory calculations, was that I, too, had a contingency plan. A plan I had quietly, and with a growing sense of grim necessity, put in place years ago after my father's first, less overt, attempt to gain control over a portion of my inheritance. A plan that involved a different and far more formidable lawyer than their Mr. Thorne. A plan that was currently residing in a secure, encrypted file on my server, a file codenamed Project Pandora. It seemed it was finally time to open the box. The family party was indeed over. But a different kind of gathering, a legal, financial, and deeply personal reckoning, was just about to begin. And the primary subject of their research, the unpredictable variable, was about to demonstrate just how unpredictable and how thoroughly prepared he truly was. The sterile, almost clinical anger that had settled over me during the drive home from my parents' anniversary party did not dissipate. Instead, it coalesced into a cold, hard resolve, the kind of focused, dispassionate determination I usually reserve for a particularly challenging research problem, for the patient, methodical unraveling of a complex microbial genome. My family, I now understood with a chilling clarity, was not just dysfunctional. They were a hostile, predatory entity, and I, and my daughter Lily, were their designated targets. Their plan, as overheard by Lily, was as audacious as it was monstrous. To have me declared mentally incompetent, a convenient legal maneuver that would grant them control over not just my personal wealth and the substantial new research grant I had recently been awarded, but also my share of the considerable family trust established by my late grandfather. The mention of a helpful doctor they had already lined up was the most chilling detail, a clear indication that this was not some spur-of-the-moment fantasy, but a premeditated and already partially implemented conspiracy. My first call, upon returning to the quiet sanctuary of my own home, was not to a lawyer, not yet. It was to my sister, not Julian's wife Cassandra, but my own estranged older sister, Amelia. Amelia was a brilliant, if somewhat abrasive, investigative journalist, a woman whose career had been built on exposing the corrupt and the powerful. We had had a falling out years ago, a silly, prideful argument over a long-forgotten family matter, and our relationship since had been one of cool, distant formality. But I knew, with an instinct that transcended our personal grievances, that Amelia possessed two qualities I now desperately needed: a profound, almost genetic, distrust of our parents' and brothers' motives, and a relentless, almost terrifying ability to unearth damaging truths. She answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and impatient as I remembered. "Marcus? To what do I owe this unexpected, and I must say, rather late-night honor?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I laid out the situation concisely, factually, detailing Lily's overheard conversation, the plot to have me declared incompetent, the mention of the helpful doctor and the new lawyer, Thorne. Amelia listened in a silence that was, for her, unusually prolonged. When she finally spoke, the earlier impatience in her voice was gone, replaced by a low, dangerous hum of controlled fury. "The absolute unmitigated gall of those people," she said, her voice like chipped ice. "To use their own son, their own brother, as a mark for their grubby little financial schemes, it's almost impressive in its sheer sociopathic audacity." She paused. "So, what's your plan, little brother? Are you going to let them roll over you, or are you finally ready to fight back?" "I'm ready to fight back, Amelia," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And I believe I have a rather comprehensive contingency plan in place. Project Pandora, I call it. But I need your help. I need your skills. I need you to find out who this helpful doctor is. I need you to do a deep dive on this lawyer, Thorne, and on my brother Julian's recent financial adventures. I suspect his wife Cassandra's sudden and extravagant lifestyle is not being funded by her non-existent career as a lifestyle influencer." There was another pause, then a sound that I hadn't heard from my sister in over a decade, a low, almost delighted chuckle. "Project Pandora, you say? I like it. Consider me on board, Marcus. It's been a while since I've had a really juicy, high-stakes investigation to sink my teeth into. And taking down our esteemed family? That's not just a story, my dear brother. That's a public service. And with that, the most formidable and most unlikely of alliances was forged." While Amelia began her discreet, but I knew, ruthlessly efficient investigation, I turned my attention to activating my own long-dormant legal and financial defenses. My first step was to contact Alastair Vance, the solicitor who had helped my grandfather set up the original family trust, and who had subsequently helped me establish my own, entirely separate and largely invisible network of personal trusts and offshore holding companies, the core components of Project Pandora. Alastair, a man whose discretion was as legendary as his grasp of labyrinthine international financial law, was not surprised by my call. "Ah, Marcus," he'd said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I had a feeling a day like this might eventually arrive. Your grandfather, a very wise man, had a rather clear-eyed assessment of certain family members' characters. He believed in preparing for unforeseen meteorological events, shall we say. We spent the next few hours in a secure video conference, reviewing the structure of Project Pandora. It was a fortress, a multi-layered defense designed to be almost entirely impervious to the kind of legal assault my family was clearly planning. My personal assets, including the proceeds from the sale of a successful biotech patent I had developed years ago, were held not in my own name, but by an offshore holding company, registered in a jurisdiction known for its impenetrable corporate privacy laws. The new research grant, while awarded to me personally, had been funneled, entirely legally, through a specially created foundation, with a board of independent trustees, all distinguished and fiercely loyal academic colleagues of mine, making it exceptionally difficult for any external party to claim or control. And the family trust, my grandfather's legacy, the primary target of their avarice? It contained a rather beautifully crafted poison pill clause, a clause Alastair and I had worked on together years ago, a clause that my father, in his arrogance, had clearly never bothered to read or understand. The clause stipulated that if any beneficiary of the trust were found to have initiated or participated in a legal action deemed by the independent trustees to be frivolous, malicious, or intended to unjustly deprive another beneficiary of their rightful share, then that beneficiary's own stake in the trust would be immediately and irrevocably forfeited and redistributed among the remaining non-offending beneficiaries. In essence, by plotting to have me declared incompetent and seize my share, my parents and Julian were unwittingly preparing to legally disinherit themselves. The sheer, elegant irony of it was a testament to Alastair's legal genius and my grandfather's shrewd, if somewhat cynical, understanding of his own offspring. The stage was being set for a confrontation, but it was not the one my family was anticipating. They believed they were preparing for a simple, straightforward ambush, a clinical removal of an unpredictable variable. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully prepared, multi-layered, and legally devastating countertrap. The microbiologist they had so casually dismissed was about to demonstrate that the most dangerous pathogens are often the ones you can't see, the ones that lie dormant, waiting for the perfect conditions to replicate, to spread, and to overwhelm the host system. And my family, in their greed, had just provided the perfect petri dish. Amelia's investigative prowess proved to be as formidable as I had remembered. Within 48 hours, she had identified the helpful doctor. He was a semi-retired psychiatrist named Dr. Alastair Finch. The recurrence of this particular name in my various life dramas was becoming a source of almost cosmic amusement. A man with a somewhat checkered professional history, including several past censures for providing questionable diagnoses to facilitate legal and insurance claims. He was also, Amelia discovered, a regular at my father's exclusive and notoriously gossipy golf club. The connection was clear, the potential for collusion undeniable. Her research into the lawyer, Bartholomew Thorne, was equally illuminating. Thorne was a specialist in contested estates, a legal bottom feeder known for his aggressive tactics and his willingness to take on high-risk, ethically dubious cases on a contingency basis. He had a reputation for dragging out proceedings, for burying his opponents in a blizzard of frivolous motions, for making the legal process so expensive and so emotionally draining that his adversaries would often settle for a fraction of what they were owed, just to make it stop. He was, in short, the perfect weapon for my family's planned campaign of attrition. And Julian and Cassandra, my brother and his wife. Amelia's initial financial deep dive revealed a lifestyle funded almost entirely by debt and a series of increasingly desperate and likely fraudulent small-scale property schemes. They were living in a house of cards, heavily leveraged, and clearly saw my share of the family trust and my personal wealth as their only viable path to solvency. Their motivation was not just greed, it was desperation. They needed my money, and they were clearly willing to go to monstrous lengths to get it. Armed with this new intelligence, I convened another secure video conference with Alastair Vance, my solicitor. "The picture is becoming clearer, Alastair," I said, "and considerably uglier. They are not just planning to challenge my competency. They're actively conspiring with at least two ethically compromised professionals to fabricate a case against me. This is moving beyond a mere family dispute into the realm of criminal conspiracy." Alastair listened calmly, his expression grim. "Indeed, Marcus, and our response must be equally robust. The poison pill clause in your grandfather's trust is our primary defensive weapon. But we also need an offensive strategy. We need to preempt their attack, to seize the initiative before they have a chance to file their competency challenge and mire you in months, perhaps years, of legal and psychological warfare." His plan was audacious, elegant, and entirely in keeping with his reputation for strategic brilliance. We would not wait for them to act. We would act first. Alastair would draft a formal petition to the court, not to contest a will, but to seek a judicial clarification on the terms of the family trust, specifically on the interpretation and application of the poison pill clause. This petition would, with a lawyer's careful, almost surgical precision, lay out the evidence we had gathered of the conspiracy against me. Lily's witness conversation, Amelia's research into Dr. Finch and Thorne, the clear financial motives of Julian and Cassandra. We wouldn't explicitly accuse them of a crime, not yet. We would simply present the court with a deeply troubling pattern of behavior and asked for a ruling on whether this pattern constituted a malicious action as defined by the trust's own terms. The beauty of this approach, Marcus, Alastair explained, is that it forces them onto the defensive. They will be compelled to respond, under oath, to the evidence we present. They will have to explain their conversations, their associations with Thorne and Finch, their sudden intense interest in your mental fitness. And they will have to do so under the very real and very immediate threat of triggering the forfeiture clause that will see them instantly and irrevocably disinherited. It was a legal masterstroke, a way to turn their own conspiracy against them, to use the very trust they sought to plunder as the instrument of their potential downfall. While Alastair prepared the legal documents, I turned my attention to a different, more personal aspect of the plan. I needed to ensure Lily was protected, shielded from the inevitable fallout. I arranged for her to take a pre-planned, and now conveniently extended, trip abroad, a summer research program in Costa Rica she had been dreaming of. She would be out of the country, unreachable, and blissfully unaware of the family drama unfolding in her absence. My final preparation was perhaps the most theatrical. I knew that my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, for all their pretensions to sophistication, were deeply, almost provincially, concerned with appearances, with their standing in their small, insular world of private clubs and charity committees. A quiet, private legal defeat might be humiliating for them, but a public one would be catastrophic. I instructed Alastair to ensure that a copy of our petition for judicial clarification, once filed with the court, was also discreetly and entirely legally delivered to two other individuals, the chairman of the board of my father's golf club and the formidable Mrs. Albright Smythe, the undisputed queen bee of my mother's various charitable endeavors. A woman whose opinion could make or break a social reputation with a single, well-placed, condescending remark. It was a cruel move, perhaps, but their plan to have me declared mentally unfit, to strip me of my autonomy, my reputation, my very identity, was a cruelty of an entirely different magnitude. They had chosen to make this a war fought in the shadows with whispers and lies. I was simply choosing to bring it out into the light, to let the facts and the inevitable social consequences fall where they may. The stage was set. The legal documents were drafted. The key players were, unknowingly, in their places. My family was preparing for an ambush, confident in their numbers, their strategy, their helpful professional allies. They had no idea that they were not the hunters, but the prey. And the trap, the one my grandfather, Alastair, and I had so carefully constructed years ago, was about to be sprung, not by a frontal assault, but by the quiet, inexorable, and utterly devastating closing of a legal and social loophole they hadn't even known existed. Project Pandora was about to be unleashed, and the fallout, I knew, would be significant. The day Alastair Vance filed our petition with the court was, by all outward appearances, an ordinary Tuesday. The wheels of justice, particularly in matters of complex trust law, usually grind exceedingly slow. But the copies of that petition, delivered by discreet courier to the offices of the golf club chairman and the private residence of the formidable Mrs. Albright Smythe, acted with the speed and efficacy of a virulent, socially transmitted pathogen. The reaction, as relayed to me by Amelia, whose journalistic sources in the city's upper echelons were, as always, impeccable, was immediate and catastrophic for my family's carefully cultivated reputation. The golf club, a bastion of old-money conservatism, was apparently scandalized by the suggestion that one of its prominent members, my father, was embroiled in a conspiracy to defraud his own son. The chairman, a man for whom financial propriety was second only to a low golf handicap, reportedly convened an emergency meeting of the club's ethics committee. My father's position as a respected elder statesman of the club was, it seemed, suddenly and precarious. But it was the reaction of Mrs. Albright Smythe that was truly devastating for my mother. Beatrice's entire social identity was built on her role as a leading light in the city's philanthropic circles, a world where reputation is everything. Mrs. Albright Smythe, as the undisputed queen bee of that world, was not amused by the contents of our petition. The idea that Beatrice, her trusted colleague, was involved in a sordid plot to have her own son declared mentally incompetent for financial gain was an affront to the very values of charity, compassion, and familial duty their organizations so publicly espoused. Within days, Beatrice was quietly, but firmly, asked to take a leave of absence from her position as chair of the annual hospital charity ball, a role she had held and cherished for over a decade. Her social standing, once as solid as the granite foundations of the city's old bank buildings, had crumbled into dust. The legal summons, when it finally arrived at their respective homes, was, in a way, almost an anticlimax. My father, my mother, Julian, and Cassandra were now not just facing a legal battle. They were facing a social firestorm of their own making. They were legally compelled to respond to our petition, to appear before a judge and explain, under oath, their hushed conversations in the study, their association with the disgraced Dr. Finch, their engagement of the predatory Bartholomew Thorne. They were trapped, their conspiracy laid bare not just in a court of law, but in the even more unforgiving court of public opinion, or at least the opinion of the small, insular public they cared so deeply about. Their first move, predictably, was a panicked, blustering attempt at a counterattack. Thorne, on their behalf, filed a motion to have our petition dismissed as frivolous and vexatious, claiming it was a malicious, preemptive strike on my part, designed to intimidate and harass his vulnerable, grieving clients. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense jurist named Eleanor Vance, the universe, it seemed, truly did have a sense of humor, was not impressed. At the preliminary hearing, Alastair, with his characteristic calm precision, simply presented the key pieces of our evidence. A sworn affidavit from Lily detailing the conversation she had overheard. Alastair had taken her statement before she left for Costa Rica, ensuring its legal admissibility. Amelia's comprehensive report on Dr. Finch's and Thorne's checkered professional histories, and a preliminary financial analysis suggesting a clear and compelling motive for their actions. The judge listened intently, her gaze sharpening as Alastair laid out the clear, logical, and deeply disturbing pattern of their behavior. She then turned to Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice like chipped ice, "your clients are accused of conspiring to have their own son and brother declared mentally incompetent for the purposes of financial gain. They are accused of colluding with a medical professional of questionable ethics to achieve this end. The evidence presented by Mr. Vance, while preliminary, is, frankly, deeply troubling. You call this petition frivolous? I call it a matter of profound and urgent judicial concern. Your motion to dismiss is denied. A full hearing on the matter of the trust's poison pill clause will be scheduled for 6 weeks from today. And I would advise your clients, Mr. Thorne, to prepare their responses with a degree of candor and honesty that appears to have been thus far conspicuously absent from their dealings." Thorne, visibly deflated. The bluster, the arrogance, the easy confidence of a legal predator, all vanished, replaced by the pale, sweaty sheen of a man who knows he is profoundly, and perhaps professionally, miscalculated. The 6 weeks leading up to the full hearing were, I imagine, a period of excruciating anxiety for my family. They were trapped in a legal and social vice of their own making. Their friends and associates, once so quick to offer flattery and camaraderie, now treated them with a cool, cautious distance. The invitations to dinner parties and social events dried up. The phone, which had once rung with the reassuring cadence of their secure, comfortable lives, now remained largely silent, or brought only the unwelcome summons of their increasingly desperate and expensive legal team. They tried to negotiate, of course. Thorne made several overtures to Alastair, offering a series of increasingly generous settlement proposals if we would just agree to withdraw our petition and let this unfortunate family matter be resolved in private. Alastair, on my instructions, politely but firmly refused each offer. This was no longer about money. It was about principle. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring that they, and the world they inhabited, understood the true nature of their actions, the profound depth of their betrayal. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was small, private, but the weight of the occasion was immense. My father, my mother, Julian, and Cassandra sat at the opposing table, a small, huddled group of co-conspirators, their faces drawn, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. They looked diminished, stripped of their social armor, their financial confidence, their arrogant assumptions. They were just four rather grasping, rather foolish people who had been caught in a trap of their own making. The judge, Eleanor Vance, entered. The proceedings began, and I, the quiet microbiologist, the unpredictable variable, sat beside my solicitor, Alastair, ready to present my final unassailable research findings on the rather toxic culture that had been allowed to fester for far too long within my own family. The day of reckoning, meticulously planned and patiently awaited, had finally arrived, and the prognosis for them was not good. The hearing on the judicial clarification of my grandfather's trust was a masterclass in quiet, legalistic evisceration. Alastair Vance, my solicitor, did not resort to theatrics or emotional appeals. He simply, methodically, presented the facts, a relentless, dispassionate accumulation of evidence that painted an undeniable picture of conspiracy and malicious intent. He presented Lily's sworn affidavit, her account of the conversation she had overheard at the anniversary party, a narrative delivered with the clear, unshakable conviction of a young woman who knew precisely what she had heard. He presented Amelia's comprehensive dossier on Dr. Alastair Finch and Bartholomew Thorne, detailing their histories of professional misconduct, their reputations as legal and medical guns for hire, their clear suitability as willing accomplices in a scheme to defraud. He presented the financial analysis, demonstrating Julian and Cassandra's precarious debt situation and their powerful, almost desperate, motive for seeking to control my assets. And finally, he introduced the concept of Project Pandora, my long-standing contingency plan, explaining that my trusts and offshore holdings were not a recent, reactive measure, but a long-established, prudent defense against the very kind of familial avarice that was now on full display. The cumulative effect of this evidence was devastating. My father, when questioned by Alastair about his association with Dr. Finch, became flustered, offering a series of contradictory and increasingly implausible explanations about informal chats about general wellness and hypothetical discussions about long-term care options. My mother, when asked about the conversations Lily had overheard, dissolved into a puddle of tearful, incoherent denials, claiming Lily must have misunderstood or imagined things, a defense that crumbled under Alastair's gentle but persistent questioning. Julian and Cassandra, when faced with the stark reality of their own financial desperation, became defensive and hostile, their attempts to portray themselves as concerned, loving family members dissolving into a bitter tirade of blame and self-pity. But the true masterstroke, the one that sealed their fate, was Alastair's final submission to the court. He presented not just the poison pill clause for my grandfather's trust, but also a series of letters my grandfather had written to Alastair years prior. Letters in which he had expressed his deep concerns about my father's and Julian's financial recklessness and their potential to bring ruin upon the family through their own foolishness and greed. He had, it seemed, foreseen this very scenario, this very challenge to the integrity of his legacy. His letters, in his own clear, decisive hand, were a posthumous indictment of his own sons, a testament to his shrewd, if cynical, understanding of their characters. Judge Vance read the letters in a profound silence, her expression growing sterner with each page. When she had finished, she looked up, her gaze sweeping over my father, my brother, my mother, and my sister-in-law, a look of such withering contempt that even I, from my detached vantage point, felt a momentary flicker of, well, if not pity, then certainly a sense of the awesome, crushing power of judicial disapproval. Her ruling, when it came, was swift and brutal. She found, unequivocally, that their actions, the conspiracy to have me declared incompetent, the collusion with Finch and Thorne, the clear financial motives, constituted a malicious, frivolous, and deeply disturbing attempt to unjustly deprive me of my rightful inheritance, an action that fell squarely within the prescriptions of the trust's poison pill clause. Therefore, she ruled, with immediate and irrevocable effect, that my father, Arthur Hayes, and my brother, Julian Hayes, had, by their own actions, forfeited any and all current and future claims as beneficiaries of the Hayes Family Trust. Their shares were to be redistributed, as per the trust's own terms, to the remaining, non-offending beneficiaries, which, as it happened, left only one me. The gasp that went through the courtroom from the opposing table was a collective, ragged sound of utter, uncomprehending disbelief. In a single, devastating legal blow, my father and my brother had not just failed to seize my assets. They had, through their own greed and malice, managed to legally disinherit themselves, effectively transferring the entirety of my grandfather's considerable legacy into my sole and now undisputed control. My mother and Cassandra, as spouses, had never been direct beneficiaries, their access to the trust's wealth always contingent on their husband's status. With their husbands now legally excised, their own access was, of course, terminated. The silence that followed the judge's ruling was profound, broken only by a single, sharp, almost hysterical laugh from my sister, Amelia, who had slipped quietly into the back of the courtroom to witness the final act of this family drama. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated, and perhaps long overdue catharsis. The aftermath was a slow, messy, but ultimately deeply satisfying process of disentanglement. My father and Julian, stripped of their anticipated inheritance and facing a future of considerably reduced financial circumstances, retreated into a state of bitter, resentful isolation. Their alliance, forged in shared greed, quickly dissolved into mutual recrimination. The golf club membership, the charity committee positions, the carefully cultivated social standing, it all evaporated, their reputations in their small, insular world irrevocably tarnished. My mother, Beatrice, was perhaps the most tragic figure in all of this. She had been a willing participant, yes, but also, I believe, a victim of her own misguided sense of maternal duty, her desperation to see her son succeed, however ill-conceived their ambitions. Her final years were quiet, modest, a world away from the social whirl she had once so desperately coveted. As for me, my life and Lily's continued on its new, more peaceful, and now considerably more financially secure trajectory. The unpredictable variable had not just survived the attempt on his autonomy. He had, through careful planning, strategic patience, and a deep-seated belief in the power of truth, emerged as the sole custodian of his family's true legacy. Project Pandora had been a resounding, if somber, success. The box had been opened, its contents, a torrent of greed, deceit, and betrayal, unleashed not upon me, as intended, but upon its own architects. And in the ensuing silence, after the storm had passed, there was at last a measure of peace, a sense of justice, a quiet, hard-won, and entirely, satisfyingly, final resolution. The lab was clean. The pathogenic culture had been neutralized. And the system, my system, was finally and definitively secure. The years following the court's decisive ruling were a period of profound and lasting change. The Hayes Family Trust, now under my sole and undisputed stewardship, was something I managed with a sense of solemn responsibility, not as a personal windfall, but as a legacy to be preserved and, eventually, passed on to my own daughter, Lily, and to charitable causes my grandfather would have approved of. My father and brother, stripped of their lifelong expectation of a substantial inheritance, were forced to confront the true state of their own, rather precarious, financial affairs. Arthur, my father, his health declining and his spirit broken, lived out his remaining years in a quiet, modest retirement, his grand pronouncements and ambitious schemes replaced by a kind of weary, regretful silence. We maintained a distant, if not entirely hostile, relationship, our occasional conversations stilted, freighted with the weight of unspoken recriminations. Julian and Cassandra, my brother and his wife, fared even worse. Their house of cards, built on debt and delusion, collapsed entirely. They were forced to sell their lavish home, downsize to a small, rented apartment, and for the first time in their adult lives, to grapple with the mundane realities of living within their means. Julian's property development career, such as it was, evaporated, and Cassandra's aspirations as a lifestyle influencer became a sad, bitter joke. Amelia, my sister, the investigative journalist, watched their decline with a kind of grim, forensic satisfaction. "You didn't just win, Marcus," she'd said to me once, a rare note of admiration in her voice. "You executed a perfect, bloodless, legal, and financial coup. Dad and Julian never even knew what hit them until it was too late. Grandfather would have been impressed." Her words, though tinged with her usual cynical humor, were not without merit. The victory had indeed been a quiet, strategic one, a triumph of preparation, patience, and the unwavering application of logic and evidence against a force of emotional, irrational avarice. It had been a microbiologist's revenge, silent, systematic, and utterly, comprehensively effective. Lily, my wonderful daughter, returned from her research trip in Costa Rica to a family landscape irrevocably altered. I explained to her, in simple, honest terms, what had transpired, focusing not on the animosity or the retribution, but on the necessity of protecting our future and her grandfather's true legacy from those who would have squandered it. She understood, with a maturity that was far beyond her years, her primary emotion not triumph, but a quiet sadness for the family that could have been, for the bonds that had been so carelessly and so greedily broken. Her presence, her unwavering love and support, was my true reward in all of this, a treasure far more valuable than any trust fund. She went on to university, pursuing her passion for environmental science, her education fully funded, her future secure, unencumbered by the toxic dynamics that had so long defined my own relationship with my family. She was free, in a way I had never been, to forge her own path, to build her own life on her own terms. As for me, my life settled into a new, more peaceful, and infinitely more authentic rhythm. I continued my research, my work at the Institute, finding a deep and abiding joy in the quiet, patient unraveling of nature's microscopic secrets. The laboratory, once a refuge from the storms of my family life, now became a place of pure, unadulterated passion, a sanctuary of reason and discovery. I established a significant charitable foundation in my grandfather's name, dedicated to funding independent scientific research and providing scholarships for promising young scientists from disadvantaged backgrounds. It was a way to honor his legacy, to transform the wealth he had created into a force for good, for progress, for the very kind of quiet, dedicated, and often overlooked work that I myself had dedicated my life to. The anniversary party, that long-ago catalyst for so much upheaval, now seems like a scene from a different life, a different narrative. The man who had been deemed an unpredictable variable, a threat to be neutralized, had in the end become the sole, and I hope, worthy custodian of his family's true legacy. It was not a role I had ever sought, but one that had been thrust upon me by the avarice and betrayal of others. I had simply done what any good scientist would do when faced with a systemic contamination. I had identified the pathogen, isolated it, and implemented a rigorous and ultimately effective protocol to ensure the long-term health and integrity of the system. The lab was clean. The experiment was a success. And the future, for Lily and for me, was at last free of any and all unpredictable and entirely unwelcome variables. The quiet years that followed the legal and familial storm were like a long, slow, and deeply satisfying process of decontamination and restoration. The foundation I established in my grandfather's name became a significant force in the scientific community, its grants enabling groundbreaking research in fields ranging from microbial ecology to astrophysics. Seeing the tangible results of that legacy, the papers published, the discoveries made, the young careers launched, brought a sense of purpose and fulfillment that far outweighed any personal financial gain. Lily, my daughter, completed her doctorate in environmental science with distinction and went on to a brilliant career as a climate scientist. Her work taking her to the farthest corners of the globe, her passion for understanding and protecting the natural world a constant source of pride and inspiration for me. She married a fellow scientist, a kind, intelligent man who shared her values and her adventurous spirit, and they built a life together based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a complete absence of the kind of toxic financial and emotional maneuvering that had so marred my own earlier life. Amelia, my sister, continued her career as a respected, if somewhat feared, investigative journalist, her professional life a testament to her relentless pursuit of truth, a quality I had come to appreciate and admire. Even if our personal relationship remained a landscape of shared, if unspoken, historical complexities, we found a new, more mature equilibrium, a bond forged not in conventional sibling affection, but in a shared, clear-eyed understanding of our family's flawed and often difficult past. My father, brother, and his wife became distant figures, footnotes in a chapter of my life that was now definitively closed. Their attempts to manipulate and dispossess me had failed so spectacularly, so comprehensively, that they seemed to have simply receded from the world, their social standing diminished, their financial prospects curtailed, their lives a quiet testament to the ultimate futility of a path built on greed and deceit. One afternoon, many years later, as I was sorting through some old boxes in my study, I came across a small, framed photograph. It was of me and Lily, taken on our first trip to the coast. She a small, laughing child of 5, me a younger, less wary man, both of us squinting into the bright, salty sunlight. Tucked behind the photograph was a small, folded piece of paper, a note my late wife, Lily's mother, had written to me on our 10th wedding anniversary, long before the shadows had begun to gather in our lives. My dearest Alistair, it read, in her familiar, elegant script, you are the quiet heart of our family, the steady, unseen foundation upon which everything rests. They may not always see it, they may not always appreciate it, but your strength, your integrity, your quiet, unwavering love is the truest, most precious asset we possess. Never, ever doubt that. Tears welled in my eyes as I read her words, a voice from a happier, more innocent past, a reminder of a love that had once been real, before it had been corrupted by other, less noble influences. Perhaps, in the end, that was the true legacy, the one that mattered most. Not the trust funds, not the legal victories, not even the quiet satisfaction of a well-executed plan, but the love of a child, the respect of a sister, the memory of a love that had once been true, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that, in the face of profound betrayal, I had remained true to my own principles, to my own sense of integrity. I had been tested, I had been threatened, but I had not been broken. The microbiologist, the quiet man of science, had faced down the pathogens in his own life, and had emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and ultimately at peace. The lab, and the life within it, was at last truly and beautifully in order. The historical record was complete, and the future, for me and for my remarkable daughter, was a testament to the enduring power of truth and the quiet, unassailable strength of a well-protected foundation.